Good morning, my colleagues, and morning to the people of Guam. Committee of the Whole is called to order. We are now going to begin with Bill 66. And Senator Moreland, before you make your opening, even though you may have made something last night, we're going to go ahead and first swear in the new panel. For all the panel members that are here that were sworn in, Ms. Mignola, Nico, Ms. Valencia, and Ms. Shimizu, please be reminded that you are still under oath, and it'll be Mr. Camacho and Mr. Byrne that will be sworn in. If you can please rise and you'll be sworn in.
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, you will affirm that any and all information that you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Mr. Chair is under oath. You may proceed.
Thank you very much. I'll ask now Mr. Moreland, Senator Moreland. Excuse me. Senator Moreland, I'm going to ask you to please redo your opening of Bill 66, because now we have a full panel. I want to make sure everybody hears exactly what you have to present. And then we'll begin with, there'll be no statement by the panel. We will begin with the first reminder, my colleagues. We have 3 rounds of questions. 3 rounds. First 2 rounds are questions. Third round will be amendments and comments. And advise you to start preparing your amendments if you have any amendments for this bill. Senator Moreland, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning to our panel. Good morning, colleagues. Again, just as a reminder, Bill 66 Core, this is as amended by Committee on Economic Development and Agriculture, Power and Energy Utilities, and the Arts, and substituted in the committee as a whole on session floor here. So what we're talking about is the amended version, which removes any amendment or any changes it excludes the renovation process of the hotels. So the bill my colleagues should be having in front of them just talks about the amendment to subsection 58206 of Article 2, basically to modify the sunset provision of the special qualifying certificate of the 1,600 hotel rooms development program, just modifying the sunset provision. What I do want to mention also is that in the original public hearing, it was mentioned by Gita, the sunset provision should be for 10 years. So the new sunset will be December 31st of 2031, which is in the bill, per recommendation of Gita, which is mentioned in the public hearing, the original public hearing. Also, Gita did mention removing a China visa waiver or China visa parole declaration, which is section C or letter C on page 3 of the bill. Germane to this discussion because it was in public hearing. So no mention at all about renovation. There was physical note completed, which says since this is administrative in nature, move forward, no physical note provided. So what Bill 66, this is an economic-driven piece of legislation, which we need most especially now more than ever. This legislation isn't about big business, it's not about big tax breaks or even about giving away the kitchen sink. Rather, this legislation is about creating economic activity through construction, and in this case, through construction of new hotel and hotel rooms. This bill is introduced based on some timelines because the current law expires December 31st of this year, just within a few weeks. And again, the intent is to create an inventory of additional hotel rooms, which we know had a problem of doing when this became public law because of a few things, most importantly being the labor shortages of the H-2B during Obama administration, and it's still a consideration now. Thus meaning we need the additional time frame to get through that. This is a recommendation by Gita to continue that. We understand there is interest in new hotel rooms as well. So I'm hoping for a positive impact on this bill and good discussion. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel.
All right, thank you, Senator Moylan. We will now begin the first round of questions, and we'll begin with Speaker Therese Terlai. Madam Speaker, do you have any questions for the panel?
Sure, Mr. Chair. So the original bill, as introduced, was going to extend the QC application period from December 2021 until December 2024. But this, the bill as amended extends the QC application period now for 10 more years until 2031, and I would just like for Gita to explain that new extension for 10 years, what data was reviewed, or how did we arrive at the 10 years versus just until 2024?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The decision the suggestion for 10 years was made during the last stakeholders meeting that was attended by Gita, GVB, and a number of GVB members as well. And the decision made to extend out beyond the 3 years was due in part, there were multiple reasons, one of which is the availability of labor. As you're aware, there is competition for construction labor in the industry. A lot of labor is directed towards defense-related projects. For these particular projects, they are allowed to get H-2B visas, as we saw with the Tsubaki Tower. Nonetheless, there were some delays with regard to really building momentum around this program since its inception. And as a result, in addition to that, you also have, of course, the pandemic conditions that we're dealing with. It makes it very difficult. Many of our hotel developers and investors come out of Asia. What you're well aware of is that in Asia, there are many restrictions at the current time, especially with this new variant. There are restrictions in home countries with regard to quarantine. So it'd be very difficult for investors to come out to Guam to take a look-see and do their due diligence prior to making that investment. 10 years was the recommendation at the meeting. It was not something that Gita came up with on our own. It was the suggestion and the consensus of the stakeholders that 3 years was a little bit too short and 10 years would be about right. I also have with me Mr. Ed Camacho, our business development manager, who has very good working knowledge of our qualifying certificate program, if Ed wanted to add anything.
Good morning, Senators. Mel Mendiola is correct. We reached out and we had various stakeholder meetings, and the consensus was the 3-year period was not adequate enough during this period of COVID to entice investors to come out and take a look at what they want to do in Guam. So basically, the stakeholders recommended, they actually wanted longer than 10 years, but we felt that 10 years was an adequate period for this to build an extra about 1,300 more rooms, because we already have 340 rooms with the Tsubaki Hotel. The goal was to develop 1,600 hotel rooms, and we had interest of over 2,000 rooms prior to the H-2B issue that hit Guam, but they all started falling off. So only 2 QCs were issued, and one of them is in the process of a mutual revocation because they just don't. At this point, it's too costly for them to move forward on it. So the 10-year period is the period that was recommended by the stakeholders during our various meetings.
I do also want to point out that per the bill, it is sunsetted once the goal of 1,600 is met. So in the event that this extension takes place and the clouds kind of part in with regard to this pandemic, and we can get those investors back on island, if the 1,600 is met within 3 years, this bill will sunset within 3 years. This is just to allow for a little bit more flexibility with regard to that requirement.
Thank you. Was there any new assessment of the need for 1,500 or 1,600 rooms? I know that was done prior to COVID and prior to shutdown of tourism and all the changes and what we're going to probably see. So just curious if GVB, do you still feel the need for 1,600 rooms?
Thank you, Senator. So I do want to comment that 1,600 number, at the time the Special Hotel QC was developed, was the goal to reach 10,000 rooms on island. Currently, we have about 8,200 rooms, 8,220. And so that number is fine to hold for now, but I think it's more of a goal to reach 10,000 altogether. And the reason for that was 10,000 rooms at an 80% occupancy could garnish about 2 million visitors a year. So that's where the whole premise of this came from. So that number can shift up and down. Hotel rooms, as we've seen over the past couple of years, get taken offline for renovations or converted into offices. So that number always fluctuates, but I think for the most part, that goal of hitting 10,000 is fine.
And new rooms is still the priority despite the other needs in the tourism industry right now.
Well, actually, from the Bureau's perspective, and I think the body here knows, and I'm sure the panelists will agree, that the focus is more on internal investment and reinvestment back into existing properties to make us a little more attractive as a destination. Once borders open up again, we do need to have a nice shiny new product to market out there.
I agree with that, and that's why I'm concerned that every dollar that we take away, put someplace else, if that's not the priority, we're not getting closer to our priority. Yeah. I wanted to ask, so when this law was originally passed, it looked like, their intent was this was going to be the last QC that was granted until GITA did a study. They were supposed to promulgate industry-specific policy, regulations, criteria, and measurable goals, ensuring the appropriate stimulation of legitimate investment of new economic development, which shall not include industry-specific development projects already satisfactorily established on Guam, so that to ensure government not unnecessarily waive needed revenue for an industry-specific project category that already exists or is satisfactorily established. So I just wanted to know, were those rules or industry-specific policies developed? This was in 2015. This was looks like a Senator Rodriguez law.
This was not something that if it was being developed, it was not transitioned into the new administration.
All right. It looks like, that was the goal when they passed this QC. And so, I guess I'm going to ask Gita to follow up on that. It looks like, they wanted to be sure that for any QCs that we grant in the future, right, that those are really for new industry, that we are diversifying our economy, as we've always talked about. And so I guess, is there any new economic impact? There was no fiscal note on the original law that was passed, so I don't know what they predicted to be the fiscal impact of this, but I guess if there's anyone on the panel who could talk about whether there would be any new fiscal impact by delaying it for 10 years or allowing this to be spread over 10 years as opposed to expiring in 2021. Obviously, it takes cash away from, it would take revenue if there was any, away from, putting into other projects. But if there's any other impact, Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Senator. Good morning. The fiscal note indicated, and as you said, the original fiscal note indicated that there was no fiscal impact. And that continues to be the case. The whole idea of a qualifying certificate is that it generates revenues. But we cannot at the moment predict what those revenues are going to be. It's reasonable to assume that any revenue that's conceded as a result of tax revenues under the qualifying certificate would be replaced with new tax revenues as a result of the investment.
Which revenues would that be?
Well, the revenues is derived from the people that will be occupying the new hotel rooms, which benefits both the special funds and the general fund.
But those taxes are waived under the QC.
Well, yes, but the whole basis of all this is that the replacement revenues exceed the taxes raised.
Pardon?
The whole basis of this is that the replacement revenues, the new revenues that you generate, exceed the taxes that you have conceded under the qualifying certificate. And for the purposes of the fiscal note, we've assumed a balance, but we expect there to be a return on the investment.
Yeah, I'm just asking if you have any specifics on what we can expect.
No, that would be an economic forecast.
Pardon?
That would be an economic forecast, which, for 10 years, we're not into producing economic forecasts, and that's why the fiscal note indicated that there really was no fiscal impact.
They're saying there's no fiscal impact because it's already existing, but the original law did not say there was no impact. They just didn't provide a fiscal note back then.
Well, that, I don't
Anyway,
want
so
to speculate on that.
75% of income tax is rebated over 20 years, 100% of real property tax over 10 years, 50% of business privilege tax over 20 years, 100% of the use tax. Yeah, that's why I just wanted to know if we have anything to balance that out. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Torres, do you have any questions for the panel?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Gita, when we consider now extending this to 10 years, clearly the QC is an incentive to investors to come into Guam, but I'm trying to come to terms with the validity or the necessity to make it 10 years as it applies to the return on investment, and how you would come to 10 years as being a more desired time frame. Can you just maybe relate the two?
Certainly, thank you, Senator. I think that one of the observations that I'd like to make as a part of the bill is that the benefit of the qualifying certificate is a percentage of the investment. So there is an upside limit to the tax incentive that a grantee of the qualifying certificate is being given. So it's not an evergreen, you don't pay real property, you don't pay this, you don't pay that for the duration of the life of your qualifying certificate. It does have a benefit that is limited to a percentage of what you are investing into our island. And how we calculate, of course, in looking at how we would kind of marry that with the return on investment, I'd like to point out the most recent example of the Tsubaki Tower. The Tsubaki Tower construction was, I believe, and Ed, you can correct me, an $80 million investment.
$165 million.
I'm sorry, $165 million investment, of which the tax incentive was limited to
10% of the total investment, or
16.5 million. And of that 16.5 million, how many new employees were created through that qualifying certificate?
well, the application said 200 to 300, but because they opened up during COVID time, they're hovering around 150 to 200 employees right now.
Right. And so I think that my colleague earlier was saying, when you look at the economic impact, this does not abate hotel occupancy tax. It also does not abate any kind of payroll taxes for those 200 or so employees. It also does not abate the gross receipts tax of all of those ancillary ancillary spend of our visitors. So when our visitors come to Guam, a typical visitor from Korea or from Japan spend in the neighborhood of, let's say, $300 on non-hotel, non-airfare types of activities. All of that money goes into our tax base via the BPT for all those small businesses, et cetera. And so that all that's all what we take into account. The 10 years, to relate the 10-year deadline is really more so for breathing room to allow for us to meet the 1600 goal with the constraints that we currently have with regard to H-2B visas, as well as the constraints we currently have with the pandemic environment.
And with that, the only follow-up question is, what is the typical time frame for completion of a hotel construction project from the time, say, everything is, say, the shovel-ready time? I understand there's a lead-in.
It took Tsubaki over 3 years.
Okay.
So for the first 3 years, there's 4 benefits. They have up to 75% of their income tax, which they have, I think maybe this might be the first year because they just opened up. So for the first 3 years, they were not able to avail of any income tax benefits. On the BBT GRT side, it's 50% of the unpledged. So 3% of the 5% BBT is pledged. So they get 50% of the unpledged, which is only 1% because it's 2% remaining. So it's not the full, it's not 2.5% of the 5%, it's 50% of the unpledged. And the property taxes is up to 10 years, so they were able to avail of that, and the use tax of 4% to bring in materials for it. So for the first, they opened up, I think just last year, they were only able to avail of, before that time, of only the property and the use tax. So, and then what we're told is because of depreciation, it could take up to 7 to 8 years before they avail of any income tax benefits. But now that they're open, they are paying GRTs. And the 10 years it's really the marketing time to get over this COVID, to get investments into Guam. And what we've learned is in many of our trade missions, when we go out and try to sell the special hotel QC, it takes about 2 years to convince a foreign investor to look at Guam to make a decision. It's just not out there pressing palms one time and then investments made. There's a lot of due diligence. They send out groups and teams to look at our taxes, to look at properties, to possibly acquire property or acquire hotels. A lot of the large hotel, what we've learned, a lot of the large hotel companies out there, they don't really want to build a new hotel. They want to acquire and add to their worldwide property listing. But there are some of the smaller ones that are looking at Guam, and they're looking at the forecast that GVB has put together with tourism. 1.6 million tourists is a very good enticement for this type of investment coming from Asia.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Duenas, sir?
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the panel. Nico, when we were hearing the bill before it was substituted now to take out the renovations, I think you said something important, so I want you to kind of reiterate that again and refresh our memories. GVB is consistently looking at the competitiveness of our region and the markets. Can you once again reiterate your findings and why it's so important to continue to be competitive?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, the whole concept that we've shifted to, and I think everybody agrees, is that we are looking for a higher yield quality visitor. But in order for us to attract that, we need a quality destination experience. And what I mean by experience is from the airport to the hotel room to our beaches to our parks. And so when we brought up renovations and reinvesting back into our product, what I mean by that is we're really trying to bring the brand equity of the island to a higher level so that we can attract these higher spending, higher quality visitors. And I think this special hotel QC is probably one of the best ways for a long-term investment, to help the private sector kind of get us to that point. And the issue that we're seeing is our markets are very tech savvy, and hotel rooms in Korea are, have the latest amenities. There's USB ports everywhere in the room for charging stations and things like that. So these very simple quality of life things play a very big role in the experience, and this is key to that. So.
My follow-up on that, Nico, is you mentioned also that our competitors are not sleeping. I mean, they're still very bullish on tourism regionally in other areas of the world very close to us. So what is the need to make sure we're always competing, not only quality but also making sure we have the capacity to market, simply because, like I said, I think you've mentioned this before, that tourism still remains a very top economic driver regionally, and how do we stay competitive?
Thank you, Senator. So with the whole pandemic, the tourism industry globally has seen a paradigm shift to quality and destination in terms of safety and health. We've seen a shift in consumer demand to secondary cities. There's a higher demand to go into wide open spaces that are not as dense, as opposed to like a New York City. And so all of these things play into it, but I think to your point about our competitors are not sleeping is we're all competing for a market that has now been compressed, right? And so what that means is if we don't have what they're looking for, they will easily take their dollars elsewhere.
That's all for now, Mr. Chairman. Tsubaki.
Thank you, Senator Ennis. Senator Moyle, do you have any questions on your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. For Nico, also, explain to us what an additional 1,600 rooms would do for the other businesses that support the tourist industry. How would this affect outside, and how would this support jobs, or how do you see this as beneficial by increasing it to 1,600 rooms?
Sure. So thank you, Senator, for your question. But the 1,600 room, like I mentioned before, was an internal goal to hit 10,000 rooms for the island and to have a 10,000 limit inventory. And what that could yield each year for 365 days was close to over 2 million people and in those packs, right? So, of course, we wanted more capacity. Our hotel rooms were filled at 90% at the peak of it in 2019. And so there was a need for additional capacity. If everyone was competing, the prices of those rooms were going up. And so obviously more capacity means we can bring in more visitors, we can book more nights. On average, each visitor that stays in a hotel room pays about $27 to $28 a night. And of course, that is evident in our tourist attraction fund, which I do have to make mention is not affected by this special hotel QC. So adding additional rooms that give us new amenities can help us raise the price of those rooms and those average daily rates, and then the higher taxes from the tourist attraction fund on that. So, you know, tourism is a widespread animal, and it's hard to quantify because of the indirect, the induced, and the direct benefits that it has for the island. So.
Thank you. Mr. Byrne, prior to the pandemic and when our numbers were hitting close to that 2 million mark, and what this original bill really wanted to do and hopes to continue to do with the extension up to 10 years as expressed by Ed here, of the need for the 10 years extension. But when with the possibility and the attraction of these businesses to open up additional hotel rooms prior to the pandemic, how were we doing? How was our general fund with the numbers that we were hitting so high? And if we make the 10,000 rooms, like Nico was saying, what was the projection that our general fund could feel to increase, and we can provide better government services, right? Going into the general fund. What was the impact, and that can be, especially now since we're wanting to extend this QC for 10 more years?
Okay. Thank you, Senator. The general fund was the beneficiary of in particular, the gross receipts tax. As you, I'm sure, were able to determine from the CRER for the end of last year, we actually ended up much better on GRT receipts than we thought we were going to do. There are a number of reasons that may play into that. But our hotel occupancy, obviously, during the pandemic, replacing, because there were occupancy replacing, to tourists that just come there. We had other visitors, including military visitors. That obviously benefited not only the hotel tax, which isn't subject to the rebate, but did benefit gross receipts tax in particular. And that, as you saw, there was a surplus of revenues overall reported in the CRER for the fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Next question is for Daphne. I'm sorry, our director of DRT here. Mr. Camacho was explaining the cost to build the Tsubaki Towers at $160 million. Obviously, some of that cost is going to come down to buying merchandise, buying products, and hiring people, to construction of the hotel, and eventually, as Mr. Camacho was discussing, hiring several hundred of people as employees. Of course, this hotel received a benefit through the special QC, which is not $160 million, as Mr. Camacho was explaining, and we understand it's the 10%, but it's spread over 20 years. But how has that benefit the island by this one hotel, which I believe is 340 rooms? We're still short of the 1,600 rooms that we want to achieve. How has that benefited our island in the forms of jobs and what these folks pay in their employment tax, for example? How is the circulation, can you kind of explain how the circulation of these employees that are working there with their payment, with their purchasing power now, come and circulate into the island, and how that generates taxes for DRT to go back into the general fund?
Thank you, Senator Moylan. So just real quickly, and of course my colleagues have mentioned before, that with regards to the special hotel QC, the hotel occupancy tax is actually not impacted. And so of course, as the Tsubaki Towers has opened and has seen visitors, then the hotel occupancy tax has been transmitted to the Treasurer of Guam so that could be deposited into our general fund, into the TAF, into the Tourist Attraction Fund, right? That's a special fund. With regards to, of course, and I heard Mr. Camacho mention with regards to Tsubaki itself, which is, I guess, one of the few special hotel QCs that was issued after the special hotel QCs came about. The benefit, of course, we saw that was use tax that was on those items that they brought in as they were working on construction, and as well as, now, and for all hotels, because HOT is, again, not impacted by this, HOT goes to TAF, but the hotels, the BPT or the GRT that they do pay, that's going to be on their restaurant revenues. The other types of packages maybe that they may offer as well in conjunction with their hotels. So those also kind of play into it. But with regards, so also, and I don't have the numbers, but with regards to, of course, we heard that although that Tsubaki itself was projecting like about 300 employees for the about 300 or so rooms, because of the fact that we are in this public health emergency, we're only seeing 150 to 200. So, with how any business works is the GRTs, of course, those get deposited into our general fund when those get paid. Payroll taxes, the Social Security and Medicare we do not keep, but the withholding taxes we do keep within that gets deposited into our general fund. We see those in the CRER. So when there is employment, those withholding monies are paid to the general fund, and we get those, and that also helps as well to increase the monies in our coffers. And again, just it's a lot of the ancillary or those additional items that they're able to do now that, for example, DFS is open. We can see that our visitors are also going back to purchase these luxury items that were not able to initially when they were closed. And of course, the hope is that as we continue to relax some of these restrictions, and we're seeing it in different areas, as Nico mentioned, perhaps are in our competing markets, then of course those are going to be additional monies that these visitors are going to be able to spend, which translates into BPT, which of course translates into perhaps more hours for our people, so that way again they can be paid those wages, and then those wages of course they use to purchase items here on Guam. They pay also their utilities and other things. So there is an impact. I don't have I think that maybe I'm not sure if the multiplier effect or those types of things, maybe Gita, GVB may be able to speak on. But, definitely, having those additional rooms is helpful to our economy and, of course, to our general fund. And I know that when we were hitting, and perhaps GVB can talk a little bit on the numbers, because we were hitting those, we were kind of on the verge of hitting the highest numbers in terms of tourism back in 2020. And then, of course, the public health emergency came around, and that that kind of impacted us as well. But, I think pre-COVID, it's important to mention that that's where we were headed. And the hope is that, again, once we do get out of this public health emergency, that we'll have those rooms and we'll have the capacity so that we can continue to see. I think, I know Director Byrne can speak a lot about those exercises that we're having, the military exercises we're having. And so, the capacity for us to be able to house or to be able to manage a lot of these really large exercises, that's also huge, again, as we work to compete in these markets.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Byrne, just going along with what the Director was saying here as well, can you kind of explain the military exercises that were happening, and as our tourists come back, with the need for these additional hotels, because they could be conflicting, which we would need the additional hotel rooms. Recently, we're understanding there's $11 billion coming into our island for military requirements to help against our threat. So we suppose that there should be more military buildup on Guam and more hotel rooms to be occupied as well. Can you express how this will be helpful, please, Mr. Byrne?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I mean, from my own observation, from the military people that I see on the island, that there are, I guess, three main reasons for them to be here. Some are here because of military exercises, and when those exercises are in place, there's a very large number of military personnel that require to be accommodated on the island, and that's certainly been helpful. And as you know, in the last 12 months, there's been a fair number of military exercises because of uncertainty, in particular in the Indo-PACOM region. But there are also a large number of people that are required to be accommodated on island, associated, as I think you were hinting at, on the build-up of the military facilities. And there's a very large investment about taking place, and it seems to be growing, and will, I'm sure, begin to take place. And I think I saw something in the in the new NDAA bill that there's a large number for investment on Guam. That will require people here. That will require subcontractors here, contractors, personnel here, as well as military personnel who supervise construction and commissioning of these facilities. All of this will certainly contribute to the island's economy. Everybody recognizes that the military presence is a big contributor to the island's economy, and it can only, I mean, from a military, from that single point of view, I know that for leisure type tourists, the picture doesn't look so good. But from the military side, I think the expected economic benefit looks very favorable.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. And we're hoping within the 10-year time frame, which we're trying to promote on this bill, that the tourists do come back, but in the meantime, at least we do have that military. Next question, back to Nico there. Director Shimizu was discussing about the multiplier effect. Can you please expand upon that, please?
Thank you, Senator. We usually have different multiplier effects for the different scenarios or impact studies that we do in terms of even projections or revenues generated. So the range that we usually use is around 1.8 to 2.5, depending on how far-reaching we anticipate a certain initiative or a certain impact. So within that range, basically, the amount of times the dollar circulates in the economy from a visitor spending to the person employed by a hotel to their spending locally to the indirect spending and things like that. So usually a 1.8 to 2.5 range is the circular amount that we've come up with when it comes to revenues and how it circulates in the economy. Yeah.
Thank you. Final question for Mel there regarding the H-2B. How is the push coming along to increase our H-2B workers coming from other sources there? And is the governor behind it, is willing to press for Congress and for our president to open up the H-2Bs, and how important that is for our island, not only for hotel rooms, but also for outside defense construction?
Thank you for that question, Senator. The Governor Leon Guerrero has been working on the H-2B visa efforts since probably her time in office, because this has been an ongoing issue since the start of the administration. And so every trip that is made out to Washington, D.C. further reiterates and galvanizes the need for H-2B visa for projects not necessarily inside the fence, but also aligned with the military buildup, but supporting somehow the military buildup, whether directly or indirectly. Geeta has been a part of it insofar as we've been providing her with briefing papers on the state of H2 when she's gone out there. In addition, she's been working with several local companies who have experienced some challenges with regard to H-2B visas. I can't speak to what the congressman's doing, but I do know that Governor Leon Guerrero is working very hard. We do have, one thing I can note is we are at high numbers. There was the H-2B visa ban a number of years ago, and we have, when that cap was lifted, we are at high numbers with regard to H-2B visas holders. However, supporting projects outside the fence, quote unquote, remains something that we need to work through, both administratively, but also needs to be worked through at the policy level. And so the governor is doing everything she can to work through it at the administrative level with the USCIS and other agencies.
Thank you, Mel. Possibly this body can also support with a resolution going to the governor to support the president to release that and get us back in line. Final question for Director Simizu there. The physical note, of course, what may not have been provided for the original public law on this, but what have you seen with the usage of this original QC in forms of dollars and jobs that has come to the island to benefit our general fund?
Perhaps I can defer to Geeta because they do work directly also with regards to the issuing of those certificates of compliance for the Tsubaki, I think in particular, on that question.
It's unfortunate they had to open up during a COVID period because that infected their entire plans in terms of the number of employees they were going to hire and their revenue projections and the ability to offset the tax incentives that they would receive. Nevertheless, the industry is very positive that there's going to be a rebound. So Tsubaki, in my regular communications with some of the folks over there, they are very optimistic that that their hotel will realize the projections they put out when they first applied for the QC. It's taking more time than necessary, but they do want to get fully open. They do want all rooms to be open, and they're working hard every day, basically, to ensure that they meet that threshold when the market does open up and Guam realizes that our industry is on a rebound.
I think also to speak to the concrete short-term economic impact of Tsubaki Hotel, it was a new construction. And so it would take a lot of small businesses building little offices to accumulate to the amount of money that the Tsubaki Towers invested in construction and into the construction industry. And so that's the immediate economic short-term benefit. And as Mr. Camacho had said, some of the other economic benefits that are going to be recognized through employment, et cetera, a little bit more latent. And so those require more time. But of course, when it comes to building economies, one of the biggest contributors is construction. When it comes to building our GDP, construction is a major part of it. And so this is a really important part of private sector construction because we can't just rely on military construction to press our economy forward.
Thank you, Director, and that's what we really want to do is create jobs now that PUA is over, and this could be immediate help for our economy and getting jobs for our people. Madam Committee Chair, thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Senator Moylan. Senator Ada, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel for being here this morning. Ms. Mendiola, I was looking at the Public Law 32-233, and from its inception, when it was signed into law in December 2014 to, I guess, the expiration now of December 31st, 2021, only one qualifying certificate was successfully attained during this period?
There were actually two that were granted during this period, but the second qualifying certificate, which was supposed to be for the construction of 500 rooms, the applicant has withdrawn. We also had approximately 1,600 in the pipeline, applications received, as well as draft applications and letters of intent to apply that have exceeded the 1,600 cap. We had about 2,400 minus the 500 minus 2,400 minus the 500 that withdrew or is being revoked. We have approximately 1,900 in the pipeline. For the primary reason for the delay of, so if you can recall, Senator, when this public law was passed, it of course takes time for the team to mobilize and go out and introduce this qualifying certificate to investors. Investors come and take a look, see, et cetera. And then from that time, they submit their letter of intent. They start moving forward in the process. And that kind of coincided with the H-2B visa crisis when H-2Bs were cut off. And so that was the primary that was the primary contributor to the delay of any of these hotel projects at the time. Now we're dealing with a twofold issue. There's a shortage of labor, and there is also a pandemic that's occurring, making it difficult for investors to make their way here.
Yeah, that was my concern, is that, all this was prior to the pandemic, right? And perhaps some of it was due to the shortage in labor. Mm-hmm. And when I'm looking at the bill, it just authorizes for another 10 years and then an additional 2-year extension. So in 7 years, we only had 2 applicants. Mm-hmm. And now we're looking at an additional 12 years. Do you think maybe perhaps we should, one, either eliminate the sunset provision or make it a longer period? I mean, we got companies that are just rebuilding after this pandemic. They have a lot of financial situations that are going on worldwide. What we don't want to do is not entice them to come to Guam and to establish and build or renovate, and as I see the current public law has, or to expand. And I think anything that we can do to ensure that our tourism stays vibrant and continues to build, maybe perhaps just your thoughts on either removing the sunset provision or extending it for a longer period versus the 10 and 2.
Thank you, Senator, for your consideration and your thoughts in this. I think it's important to understand that this bill talks about a specific upward limit of 1,600 hotel rooms, and also giving these agencies time to understand the fiscal impacts and to assess the growth of our economy. Of course, we do believe any developers would be very happy with something that would just be a standing program and authorized forevermore. But I think it's also very nice and very wise to come back and prudent to come back once in a while to assess the state of things. Because on one hand, you do want to have this available. On the other hand, you also don't know what the state of our competitors are. One thing I wanted to mention earlier was you have countries like Malaysia, you have countries like Thailand that are currently doling out tax incentives for developers. Their tax incentives well exceed ours. I was just doing the math. Tsubaki was a $165 million investment in our island, of which we gave them approximately, there was an upward max of $16.5 million in tax incentives. The country of Malaysia, for an equivalent type of investment, would have doled out $111 million worth of incentives. Thailand would have doled out $247 million worth of incentives. So that is their appetite for new hotels. Having said that, Malaysia and Guam are in 2 different places with regard to our appetite for new hotels. And so I think it's prudent to periodically come back as a body and evaluate where we are. If this is truly a mature industry and we don't need more hotel rooms, or we need a nicer experience, then I go back to what we had been talking about, which was making it desirable for our hotels to be refreshed in addition to new hotel rooms. So those are all things I think a longer sunset or removal of a sunset would be very nice for our developers. So I would never rule that out. I think that's a very good and positive idea. But I also think that it's important to assess periodically what a program such as a qualifying certificate program is doing to accelerate the growth of our economy.
Yeah, and that's why I also brought that up about the original public law 32-233, where it also included renovations and expansion projects, right? And like you said, we get a very fresh look on buildings that are currently standing versus building a new hotel, right? I mean, eventually one day, either they come down or, they're going to have to be refurbished, and we want to make sure that our tourism industry continues to enjoy that island style of and culture of vacationing here on Guam, where America's Day begins. So, whatever we can do, I guess, to entice or keep promoting our visitor industry and keep building upon what we currently have will be good. But I take that into consideration also, as well as whether we keep the sunset provision and just expand upon what we have now. Thank you for that, and I appreciate the
Can I add
answers.
something to that?
Sure, please.
During our stakeholder meetings, it was very important to discuss renovation aspect, primarily because of the pandemic and the situations that the hotels were in right now, where their guest level was down 90%. This is an ideal time to try to reinvest. That's what we were talking about. Reinvest while you can, because prior to COVID, the curve was going up. There was no one wanted to take any of the rooms down because we were hitting 1.6 million tourists. They weren't going to take any of the rooms down and lose that revenue to renovate. But now that there is no tourists, this is a golden opportunity to renovate, to try to entice them to renovate. And the reason why we dropped based on their recommendation, increased the benefit for them, but dropped the investment amount to 10% of the appraised value. That was something that they proposed to us, that would make some of these hotels move to do some renovation. Now, that was almost a year ago, 6 months to a year ago. No one knows. We're in uncharted territory right now. We don't know how long this is going to last. But as long as we're still not hitting our numbers and we're still 90% below, it's still an opportunity for these hotels to possibly reinvest into their properties. So when we do open up and get back to normal, they will have a better experience, and Guam will have higher rated hotels. Thank you.
Yeah, and I see that here on the renovation cost, right, where no less than 20%, and that's the portion where you're talking about no less than 10% instead, right? Has that been discussed with the author of the legislation to bring that portion down to 10%?
It wasn't the proposed bill initially. To bring the investment would be 10% of the appraised value, and the benefit would be 20% of their investment.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure where that's at now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam
Thanks,
Chair,
Senator.
for the opportunity to ask some questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Ada. Senator Brown, any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to ask Ida, of course, the qualifying certificate originally was looked at as an incentive to have investment on Guam and our tourism industry, and specifically in our hotel construction on the island. It's almost becoming a standard now, and as ownership changes hands, there's still qualifying certificates. So can you let us know, out of the existing hotels in Tumon, how many have qualifying certificates and which don't? Do we know?
Yeah, I believe we have only two. We have one special hotel QC, which is Tsubaki. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not mistaken, Sheraton is the only other one we have, and they only have maybe 6 or 7 years on it.
And
so there's only two
the
QC.
rest have all phased out, the old original ones from the early 70s, the Hilton, all the early ones, Reef.
The Cliff Hotel, yes.
Oh, well, I don't know about the
And there's
Cliff.
no renewal aspect, so once their 20 years were up, that was it.
Okay, and do you see, right now, of course, we're in a very interesting situation, obviously, with this pandemic, with the hope that at some point we'll come out of it and we'll see the return of our visitors back to the island. In terms of this specific number, of this additional 1,600, and allowing this to go for the 10 years, do you think that's necessary? Or should we cut that time in half? Do you think it's necessary to leave it for this proposed amendment of 10 years that's been included and revised in this particular version of the bill?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I think that's a very important question to ask, and because, as you recall, we were even talking as low as 3 years. Mm-hmm. I think if you take away 1 year or 2 years specific to the marketing and the back and forth, right? If we were absent one factor, one limitation, so we have both H-2B visa limitations and that challenge. Right. We also have the pandemic as a challenge. Absent one of those challenges, I think 5 years would be fine, But because we have both, these are two very significant challenges. They're not small. And I think that for those reasons, we do think 10 years would be great. And again, I do kind of point back to the 1,600 room commitment here. If we were to hit the 1,600 ahead of schedule, this legislation would go away anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think that we like the 10 years. It does give us some breathing room, but that doesn't mean we're slowing down, and we're not going to wait until year 8 to start marketing this program and then come back at year 10.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I'm assuming certainly if we start getting visitors to come back in, and hopefully, it expands our economy. I mean, when you look at Tumon, there's only so many spaces left beachfront for construction that we have down there. With regards to you mentioned earlier, and again, we kind of forget, we get so Guam-centered, we forget in comparison to other parts of the world, even within our region. There are other more exotic locations certainly people could travel to if that's their desire. And what do you think this will help us provide in that experience? I mean, even now, people are changing more to a more natural environment. They're not necessarily wanting to go to the high-rise hotels, and they want a different experience in that. How do you think we compare? I mean, I know you're not the GVB here, but how do you think we compare in competition with what's available even within our region that actually is changing the perspective of what visitors want to go and experience?
Thank you, Senator. I think the key here is really on the renovation side and the reinvestment back into product, right? I know there's a lot of talk about increasing capacity, and to be honest, we really only have, I think, 5 designated H zones on the island, spread out throughout the island. So we're already reaching that capacity. I think the new focus is really on to reinvest into what we have, because I can tell you that the demand is there. The demand to travel out of their countries is there. The key for us in not dropping the ball is, what does Guam look like when they get here? After a 2 or 3 year gap of not being able to travel, they have money, they've saved up, they want to go and experience something. So, we've seen other destinations that some have done very well, some have dropped the ball. Some visitors go on, and they're very tech savvy, like I mentioned, so they listen to each other. It's peer-to-peer. And all you need is one person to say, the entire strip was closed. I went there was one restaurant open. The hotel rooms look like they haven't been cleaned in a matter of time. So that's the key for us, is we really need to start having initiatives like this that really encourage reinvestment back into the product, so that when they do return, we have a nice, shiny new thing to show them.
And out of curiosity, I mean, I'm on the outside driving to Tumon and see, of course, obviously, we see the decrease of activity, and a lot of the smaller shops are closed. Are you seeing that in terms of the current hotels down there? Are there active movements to do this renovation now that we have this slow period? Are you seeing that reinvestment happening in our existing hotels?
Absolutely, and there's the biggest one that's taking the spotlight is the Crown Plaza, formerly the Fiesta Hotel, right? That's been closed since the pandemic started. They saw it as an opportunity to use the downtime to reinvest, to bring new rooms, to bring in new furniture, new amenities. So I think they're setting themselves up for success once the market does come back.
Well, I think we certainly look forward to it. I mean, I at some point, I mean, if we even have to continue to live with different versions of COVID, I think people are going to eventually want to get back on. I haven't gotten on one for several years, and I've survived, but I know at one point I'm going to want to, as others will, and hopefully we can get the visitors back, because you're right. We were doing exceptionally well with our visitor industry, and then all of a sudden, before we could deal with typhoons, and in a few weeks we're back to business, but certainly not this 2-year, heading into year 3 that we're experiencing. But thank you so much for the information. I appreciate your insight.
Senator, I did have one more comment, sure. Madam Chair, if you don't mind. Sure. And we've shifted our exit surveys that we use to profile visitors at the airport. We've shifted it in country, and we really wanted to know what the consumers are saying. And one of the key things that I found to be very interesting is that our consumers, or these markets that come to Guam, are willing to pay a premium. They're willing to pay more, knowing that there's higher standards of safety and health. And so things like the electronic declaration form we've implemented at the airport, they're willing to pay additional monies for added value initiatives like that. And so I think that's something that I do want to share with the body, so that when we move forward in terms of new policies or new initiatives, that there has to be a balance. They're willing to pay more if the product is quality.
Well, I appreciate that. That's certainly something, it's good news for us. I appreciate your information regarding. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Perez. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel for being here this morning. I think a lot of the questions that were asked earlier, but perhaps just some more clarifying questions. For me, I think, it's so important to, use this time to boost our tourist economy by refreshing the infrastructure that we have. But too, I'm also interested in about the effectiveness of QCs and perhaps the tracking. And from what I heard is that hasn't been done. Is that correct? The effectiveness of QCs. I mean, there is a general, estimate of what the economic impact is, but has there been any kind of tracking of how QCs have benefited or, benefited the island?
Tumon Bay was built on qualifying certificates, Senator. I think that's important. That's in and of itself a metric that we cannot deny. And I think that when we discuss the tracking of existing qualifying certificates, so for example, the special hotel QC, if our tourism market had no need for additional qualifying certificates and we came here and asked for a program, then I think you should probably send us away. But there was a study done. There was a study done. The study done that did assess the state of our current tourism and the need for additional rooms. And the state of our tourism, the need for additional rooms, identified that we needed 2,000 or so additional rooms, and this program was built around that, spoke to that need. As far as our ongoing tracking, we track the level of qualifying certificate. We track the amount of tax benefits that we give out, and then every year, as far as reporting to the board, we report it on a monthly basis to the board, any active qualifying certificates, and we periodically meet with our stakeholders across all areas of business to discuss the needs, and that is oftentimes what prompts the programs that GITA has put out. So we put out a lot of things for small businesses. That was created because we had a number of small businesses that came in and said, GITA is not doing enough for small businesses. So it was very important in this administration to do that. And so with regard to answering your question, I would respectfully disagree. I think that there's a lot of data out there that shows the effectiveness of the qualifying certificates. I think there's some obvious industries that have been promoted by the qualifying certificate. And I think that what our job at this point, our job at this juncture is to determine if this industry is mature or if this industry is still growing. And I think that was the creation of the Special Hotel QC, was because it was identified to be still growing. And so we're happy to track other things, and we often do that, but that's not a standing project of ours, I suppose, to answer your question.
Okay. So how does this differ from the GRMC QC, the hotel QCs? Is there a difference?
QCs, the qualifying certificate at large, is a program of tax incentives that was authorized to help create investment incentives into our island. Different qualifying certificates dole out different types of benefits based on what is a kind of an industry, what would stimulate an industry to be created or to get going on the island. Specific to the GRMC QC, I'm not sure. I think, did they have BPT? No, they don't. Income tax rebate only. Income tax rebate, real property tax. Yeah, so there's different benefits depending on the qualifying certificate, depending on their presentation of what is determined to be the economic impact of an applicant.
Yeah, because I think the greater picture is we want to, diversify the economy, and if we're giving out tax credits or tax breaks, how do we go forward in a diversified sort of way? And, obviously we want to be fair, right, and generally speaking. So do you have any ideas about how to do this? We want to upgrade the tourist experience. We want to diversify our economy in agriculture, aquaculture, health, and so what do you see as the vision for Guam?
I think if you look at our website, Invest Guam, www.investguam.com, Senator, you'll see our qualifying certificate program and all the industries that it supports, which includes agriculture and aquaculture. So if somebody wanted to start up an aquaculture operation, they could come in and apply for a QC without legislation. It's already an authorized program. This is specific to this industry, so this helps one component, one industry of the many industries that GITA is supporting. So the qualifying certificate, I guess, to answer your question, the qualifying certificate is not a hotel-only product. There are many different types of businesses that could apply for qualifying certificates. And GITA has done its best to kind of share that with the world. But how do we diversify our industry? We pump resources into it in a variety of different ways. And GITA has been very active in working through our diversification initiatives, as well as and the governor set up her Economic Diversification Committee. There have been resources there. Those economic diversification initiatives can go after a qualifying certificate. This is specific to the tourism industry because there is a need there. I also think that it's important to understand that we should not, when an industry is depressed, generally government wants to support an industry that's depressed as opposed to take away benefits. And so I would put that out there. I think it's important to help. I think tourism is facing unprecedented challenges. I think over the last 50 years of tourism in Guam, there's been typhoons, there's been other types of, there's been SARS, September 11th, et cetera, all of which have resulted in shocks in our tourism industry that were much more short-term and and they rebounded much faster. This has been the longest standing crisis to our tourism economy to date. And I think at this juncture, we need to do everything we can to support them and stand by them.
Senator, sorry, I just wanted to comment, Senator. I just wanted to comment to your point about diversification with the qualifying certificate. I used to work at GITA, so I do have the benefit of knowing that economic side as well as GVB. And I do have to hone in on, when we talk about diversification, we can't discount or discredit diversifying in existing industries already. And what I mean by that is even a QC into the Guam Regional Medical City, GRMC, kind of allows us to diversify our visitor market into more medical visitation and things like that. So when we talk about diversification, I just want to make sure that there is enough emphasis on diversifying within an industry that's already established, because it takes a long time for new industries to be established, a lot of initial capital, it's very capital heavy. And so I think the program is great, the QC program is great, because you won't see these benefits until it takes over 20 years, 20 plus years. And to Mel's point about Tumon Bay being developed on a QC, it's a long-term investment on both sides, from the government as well as the private sector. But these initiatives are diversifying our visitor market. The need for new hotel rooms was because of our visitor market, although it was very mature with just the Japanese market. The Korean visitors came, and then the Taiwanese visitors were coming, Russian visitors were coming, and so there was an additional need to diversify further in capacity, and this is where that special hotel QC came in. So.
Thank you. So this question is for Director Shimizu. As far as compliance, are there any concerns, or I guess what is the compliance part of this for DRT?
With regards to compliance, actually, and because also in my prior work experience, I did work for a company that had a QC, and so, and I've even, of course, worked with Ed Camacho on that. And what happens on an annual basis, based on my experience, and Gita could probably speak a little bit more on this, is that Gita does actually schedule a visit with the QC holders. They review the specifics or the requirements of the QC. For example, if there are requirements for personnel that so many people have to be employed, or that a certain amount of people that are employed have to be local hires, et cetera, those types of things, a compliance check or a compliance visit is actually done on an annual basis. And so the compliance piece, whether or not the QC holder or beneficiary is complying with the requirements of the QC, that is actually done at the GITA level. Then what they do after they've determined that the compliance, or that they are in compliance, is they issue a certificate of compliance then that actually is transmitted to the Department of Revenue and Taxation. We utilize that as the basis for making sure that, of course, the benefit, whether it's a rebate on income taxes or if it's an abatement of real property or use tax, then we use that as a basis for, I guess, affirming or abating or as in line with what is the benefit of the QC.
Okay, thank you. And how often is this review of the QC holder?
Review is an ongoing kind of situation, but at least once a year.
So there was some mention before by one constituent that, or a suggestion that perhaps a weaning off of the tax benefits after they recoup their investment. Is that something that Gita...
That's irrelevant in this particular legislation because this legislation has an upward limit of 10% of the comment, I believe, was made on the basis of the old QC program for hotels. So the old QC program for hotels was sort of an evergreen abatement on BPT and income tax, et cetera. This one, the board recognized that that was a little bit too generous, so this the special hotel QC was a pared down version of the old QC. So I think in the comment that you may have heard, they were referencing the old program. This program has an upside limit of 10%. And so if you're looking at like Tsubaki, $165 million investment, they spent 165, and in return they got 16.5 in abatement, right? And that can be, and that is spread over a limited amount of time. It doesn't live forever. And so along those lines, I think that addresses that concern that you brought up.
So thank you. For that definition of hotel, basically it has to be a facility for transient use. So that's pretty a broad description, I think. Would that apply? So, and you were talking, Nico, about how there's more of an interest in going to the rural areas. Is there, I guess, maybe the question is, would this apply to bed and breakfast, this type of QC?
A bed and breakfast can apply for a qualifying certificate. Having said that, you got to make sure that the benefit and you encumber a requirement of not only an application process, but also a compliance process, both of which have costs associated to. You encumber costs at the application point, you encumber costs at the compliance, on an annual compliance fee. Those fees alone would likely discourage an Airbnb single unit from applying, because again, remember, it's a 10%, the benefit is very much limited. So if you buy something, if you operate a bed and breakfast, let's say it's a $500,000 bed and breakfast, and you come in to apply for a qualifying certificate, your upside limit on your benefit would be like $50,000, of which for 10 years you'd be spending $3,000 in compliance, so then you'd really only get $20,000. I wouldn't do it if I were them. And that's something that we explain to them that's something that we explain to applicants. It is an undertaking because in order to apply for a qualifying certificate, in order to receive a qualifying certificate and remain in compliance, that requires an outlay of expenses and resources. So there's generally a balance there. You got to make it worth it.
And excuse me, Senator Perez, I just wanted to clarify because the actual term bed and breakfast is defined in our law, and so sometimes I think we refer to in general what are short-term vacation rentals or STVRs. That could include a bed and breakfast or other, maybe hotel, motel, other transient type of establishments or accommodations. So just to clarify, a bed and breakfast actually can only be a sole proprietorship. It cannot be owned by a corporation, et cetera. And the idea behind a bed and breakfast, actually you must live in the residence. So the individual who is operating the bed and breakfast has to live there and also must serve breakfast, I guess. So there are very, very specific requirements for a bed and breakfast. So just, again, a lot of times I think the term bed and breakfast is utilized generically because of the brand Airbnb, but the reality is the Airbnb website actually has multiple different types of accommodations to include a bed and breakfast, but a bed and breakfast is very simple. So I just wanted to clarify that because again, a bed and breakfast is actually a very kind of a small operation likely because you have to live in the home. But other short-term vacation type rentals, maybe, again, just to clarify that that's probably what is more likely being referred to. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate all the responses. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Rangel, any questions for the panel? Thank you. Senator Titlegy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll try and be short. First, I thank the panel for being here. And, some of the comments that were made earlier, especially with regards to the assessment of our return for these QCs. I'm just hoping now that Gita and Revenue Tax gets together and provide that information for this, because it's really good to have numbers to show us, this is how much we gave out in QCs, or this is how much taxes we've lost to our coffers, and this is how much return we get. I mean, numbers are very important as we move forward. So I know it was mentioned, it wasn't assessed. I know, Gita, you said, well, we haven't started on that, or maybe I misunderstood you, but I think that's very important to know, because 16 million yielding in the next, not 20 years, but how much of that withholding? How many years does it take to get back that withholding? And don't get me wrong, I understand that QCs build Tumon, and its importance. But seeing the numbers and how much that we are losing in taxes is important. So I hope you move forward on that with having both agencies work together to determine that. I'm just going to go to, I had my structure going down in another direction, but I'm going to stay on the line of what Senator Perez had brought up, and that was Airbnbs and bed and breakfasts. Now, the industry is changing. The travel world is changing these days. Travelers are wanting to be a part of the community more so, and we have these 1,600 rooms that we want to try and meet that goal. Has GVB with Gita, work together to incorporate those additional, count those other rooms? Because, like I said, if you go to places like Europe or, Vienna, even California, and other Airbnbs are becoming the places to stay these days, and hotels are recognizing that. More people want to be engaged with the community, that experience, that travel experience. Have you considered that? And also, so my question, I guess, it would be with GVB. I'm sorry, I can't see. There you are, okay. When assessing the 1,600 room capacity, have you considered including the new Airbnbs popping up?
Thank you, Senator. I personally like to call the short-term vacation rentals the Airbnb hotel, because I think the last listing that I recall, if you look at the website, is a little over 300 some available rooms or types of rooms to be rented. And when you think about it, in totality, that's an additional hotel to the island. And so if we look at it that way, then yes, we do take into account that this is a new market that we didn't see. It's a little more immersed. But it's also harder to enforce and regulate as well as inform, right? Because part of our job at the Bureau is to send out word on typhoon conditions, on pandemic conditions to all the hotels, all of our members. And so it just makes our job a little harder in getting the word out to these smaller, more remote short-term vacation rentals. And that's why we've been trying to work with Revenue Tax as a great partner to get them registered so that we can reach out to them and have them officially, on our listing for visitors to trust. So yes, we do take that into account. Again, the 1,600 number was a number established to reach 10,000 rooms. So if you include the Tsubaki at 340 plus the Airbnb listings, you're looking at basically 2 essential hotels that take off 1,600. So we still are in need, if we're going to reach that 10,000 goal, of an additional 1,000 rooms. But yes, we do take that into account, although I have to admit, I don't think anybody saw the size or the magnitude of how much that would pull away from the hotels. And it's a very different market that engages Airbnb or HomeAway and other short-term vacation rental platforms. So we still have our very traditional visitors who trust, chain hotels and those brand names. But people are a little more free in their travel decisions. Our FIT travelers, free independent travelers, and these are the ones that are renting their own cars, driving into these villages, looking for these short-term vacation rentals. So it's just a different market behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it would be very difficult to try and get a hold of these individuals if you want to try and get to them and register them, because they have to be registered over at Revenue Tax, and they take quite a bit of time to ensure that their Airbnbs are nice and inviting to, but it is changing. The travel is changing. So this is something we may consider. And you said 1,000, if you consider that, that's 1,000 more rooms that are needed. So that's about how many new hotels to put in these H zones. And by the way, the H zones is in Tumon, and where are the other 4? You mentioned there are 5 H zones.
I'm sorry, Senator, I can't recall the other places. I believe it was Tumon. There was there near the Sheraton area. I think there's one down south in Umatic, and then I think one further north in like the Arunau area.
These are H zones already established?
Established H zones, correct.
Okay.
Oh yeah, the Dos Amantes as well, the Two Lovers Point.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It was mentioned earlier that we've had this QC and played the special QC, and it's been about 7 years, and we've only had one that actually act upon it. And I understand the importance of enticing investors to our island, especially during a time like this, where as far as taxes being received or the BBTs are down, and it's even going to get worse next year. So the importance of this QC is to entice investors. How many investors do you think are going to be enticed in the next 3 years, considering the situation we're in this pandemic? Are there people standing by ready to take advantage of this QC? Is there a company in interest right now? If so, how many?
Yes, Senator. There were a number of hotels that have not, that showed interest pre-pandemic, that have not withdrawn their interest since the start of the pandemic. And I think Ed can speak to our business development department kind of remains engaged, and there has been no withdrawal as of yet of interest from those who expressed an interest in applying for this qualifying certificate.
There might not be a withdrawal, but who is really, staying on top of it and ensuring that we may take advantage. What I'm trying to get here is earlier, if we only had this QC for, let's say, 3 more years, wouldn't that entice an investor to do this right now? I mean, to take advantage of it right now? I mean, what we're looking at is we need an investment and an influx into our economy now because of this pandemic. We might have gotten all this federal funding in the last year or 2, but it ends come January. It totally ends. And the whole purpose of this is to entice investors today, now, to bring that money in. But then again, we're going to be losing a certain percentage. So who has been seriously calling you like almost on a 6-month bit? Ed, can you answer that? Because I know you're involved with this big time.
That'll be your last question, Senator Tideckley.
The straight up answer is, it's difficult right now. We are in a pandemic. We are not seeing any tourists. We speak regularly with potential investors out there. Everyone's waiting to see how we rebound. The U.S. has rebounded in their tourism. Hawaii has somewhat, Guam has yet, because we are wholly dependent upon foreign tourists from Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. That makes up like 80 to 85% of our inbound tourists. The question is, there's 3 things. There's the labor issue, pandemic, and the costs have increased because of the labor issue. There's a multitude of issues why an investor right now won't invest. But the biggest thing is, when do they see rebounding? Because when I talk with these folks, if they see Guam rebounding to 1 million tourists in the next 5 years, it's going to take 3 years to build a hotel. So they're going to take a little time before they make a commitment that they will invest. Yes, the QC is very, very important. But more important than the QC is the fact that if our industry doesn't rebound, there's no reason to build at all. So I speak with them a lot. There's quite a few investors out there that are interested. no one has rescinded their letter of interest, although there's one QC that is a mutual revocation because the cost has just gone up. So there's no way to, I don't have a crystal ball that I can tell you they'll start tomorrow, but there is a lot of investment interest out there for hotel. Because that is where, when we do a lot of traveling and trade missions and we talk to different investors out there, you have to keep in mind that we have 165,000 people on Guam. It's very difficult for an investor to come in and spend $100 million on 165,000 people. A lot of it's going to be based on either an export or tourism industry. But as we try to diversify our economy, we're reaching out to different types of investors to see what moves them to look at Guam as a potential investment site compared to other destinations. But from the tourism standpoint, if this passes tomorrow, will someone break ground tomorrow? No, absolutely not. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much. We're now in the second round of questioning. We'll begin with Speaker Terlahi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In 2013, there was a scathing audit by the Office of Public Accountability regarding the QC program. So it's titled Performance Audit of the Guam Economic Development Authority Qualifying Certificate Program. Their findings were that the financial impact of the QC program is unknown. QCs are awarded regardless of economic impact to the government of Guam, and insurance industries receive more generous tax benefits than other industries. A tax benefit may have been granted to an ineligible QC beneficiary, and tax benefits were not processed in accordance with the law. One of the findings that, in detail that they made was that prudent management entails accountability of a program's performance, measured by establishing performance expectations and then gathering, maintaining, and tracking key data to determine if the expectations are accomplished. Maintaining a complete and reliable database is incumbent upon management as a means of tracking performance measures, which will in turn be compared to the expectations to determine if the organization's current system is working adequately. Then they talked about what they found at GITA back then, and then again, this is in 2013, so it was before your time, of course. But in 2013, they said that they requested information from GITA, including total amount of investments made to the economy, number of jobs created, total amount of compensation for the jobs created under the QC program by each active beneficiary. And based on the information submitted by GITA, we could not ascertain the validity or reliability of the data provided, as GITA did not independently verify certain info provided by QC beneficiaries and has yet to provide us access to the database to enable us to verify information from source documents. And then they went on and criticized at that time DRT, and again, that's before your time there. But there were very valid concerns that were brought up. In response to that, there was legislation, I think several pieces of legislation. One got vetoed that was supposed to create a qualifying certificate review board, qualifying certificate accountability and transparency measures. And then, of course, this QC got passed in 2015, right? So this QC was very clear. It put a time limit of 5 years on this new QC for the new hotel rooms, trying to get up to 1,600 more hotel rooms. But they put a 5-year limit. They don't spell it out, but I'm guessing for a reason. And on top of that, they said GITA must develop specific policy, regulations, criteria, and measurable goals, ensuring the appropriate stimulation of legitimate investment of new economic development, to not include industry-specific projects already satisfactorily established on Guam, to ensure that the government not necessarily waive needed revenue for industry-specific projects, categories that already exist or satisfactorily established. So I'm guessing that language is related to why they put a 5-year cap, and then they put a prohibition that if these industry-specific goals were not developed, No renewal of qualifying certificates or hotels shall be approved and issued until such time as those policy, regulations, criteria, measurable goals were developed. And so I think it's very, I just want to say, I appreciate that we can all discuss in general benefits of QCs. But here in the legislature, we're looking at a bill. What I'm looking for is some cost-benefit analysis, right? And I'm telling you, there was none done when this original law was passed, and there's none done today. We've not seen the details of the taxes that are estimated to be abated or the benefits, and many of you, went on about the benefits, but we got no concrete numbers on those benefits, right? So I'm just saying, that's why we keep asking about it. I think it's very pertinent to us as a legislature trying to decide on whether to extend a QC, whether to grant any other QCs. That's absolutely relevant. What is the cost-benefit analysis? I wanted to ask.
Thank you, Speaker. Your time is up. Senator Nelson, do you have any questions for the panel?
If you don't want it.
I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Torres. Oh, yes, Senator Nelson.
Were any conditions put on the Tsubaki QC?
Well, I think the biggest condition that would speak to the cost-benefit analysis of the qualifying certificate, in particular ones that have been created since that I would agree with you, that was quite scathing, that QC report from the OPA. Thankfully, I was not there. So since then, the cost-benefit analysis, since then, the one QC that has been granted, or specifically within this, the special hotel qualifying QC, with regard to the cost-benefit analysis, the cost is the amount that was doled out in qualifying certificate in tax benefits. And so that is based on, there is an upside limit as articulated in this legislation. So the legislation says 10%, Ed, it's 10% of the total investment. So that is the cost to the people of Guam. When that is recovered over a period of time. I agree with you. I think it does need to be studied, and that's something that we'd very much like to do with regard to the Tsubaki QC. But they are not, when a hotel isn't making any income, the analysis is that they've invested 185 and they have not really abated much at all. And I think that one thing that we can provide to you very quickly is the amount of abatement that they've sought thus far with regard to their real property, with regard to their use tax, with regard to income and BPT that they've claimed so far. So we've authorized the cost to the people of Guam was the 18 or so million. How much have they, how much of that has been drawn down on by the qualifying certificate applicant? We can provide that to you. And that is something that we keep a running balance of. And I'm sure that that's something that we keep a running balance of since that 2013 report. And then as far as the ancillary benefits such as payroll taxes, et cetera, I think payroll taxes and spending as a result, I think that's something we can certainly look at doing going forward. But this is the first active QC in that time. So we'd like to be able to track that information for you. We can certainly, unfortunately, we cannot give you precision when there's not been no action on this, or there's been little action on this thus far. So I think that the Tsubaki Tower has been a very good test case for us with regard to the impact and the return on investment and the cost-benefit analysis.
Senator, if I could also point out, with respect to the taxes, there's a lot of information in the audited financial statements on Note 1B for all the QC programs, and it sets out in aggregate the amount of taxes in the year that are actually conceded.
And what were the conditions specifically for the Tsubaki QC?
Some of the other conditions they have to comply with is community contributions. which is the community contributions, which funds all of our QCC programs, which is half of 1% of the investment, as well as the percentage of the arts, which is 1% of the total investment, or total construction costs. So there are other conditions that and the 1% for percentage of the arts is monitored by CAHA. They are the ones that money, that funding goes to. So there are other conditions out there. From our compliance side, we can tell you what we issue out certificate of compliance for. But when it comes to the actual drawdown on tax benefits, that's really a Department of Revenue taxation function over there. And I'm not sure whether they can tell you any particular QC beneficiary what type of benefit they realize. I'm not sure if that's possible.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Camacho. So just a few things. One, to expand on also what Director Byrne was saying earlier with regards to the information, the audit. DRT actually is required by law to submit not just specifically a QC information, but a tax credit report. We're a bit delayed on that, and our team will work to get that so that way the body can receive that information. But Madam Speaker, one thing that as I've been at the department that I've talked with my team about is, and I don't know if this has to be required by law, but it is on our side, it's very cumbersome to manage, trying to manage all of the information relating to the QC. And there's different types of QCs. There's also credits as well, not just QCs, but there's credits as well that we work to manage. And what happens is, of course, I believe at one point we did have turnover in terms of the person who was involved in managing the information, but it comes from all sides. There's the public health credit that I guess some of the providers get if they accept MIP, right? And so there's Medicaid, MIP. There's also the GRAP credits. There's all kinds of credits that we manage outside of the QC. There's different types of benefits. There can be an abatement of taxes. There can be a rebate of taxes. There can be, again, so it becomes a little bit difficult. One thing that I've talked with my team about, and which I think I've mentioned to Gita, is if it's possible to require QC holders or tax credit holders to maybe file a report where they themselves, of course, in addition to what happens with compliance, but where they themselves maybe report out the total amount of the credits that they have taken so far, the total amount of credits that are in balance if there is a limit. So that way it makes it a little bit less cumbersome, because I'll tell you on the DRT side, also it reaches multiple branches. It's real property, it's use tax, it's BPT, it's income tax, and again, for us, of course, those are all separate branches for us, so it becomes a little challenging, but we will work to try to get you what information we have, ma'am.
Okay, so you're going to report back to the legislature the information.
What it is again, Revenue Tax is required by law to submit a report. Perhaps what we can do is provide what the most recent report is that we did provide, and it is a tax credit report. It's not specific only to QC. So it's the Guam Apprenticeship Program. It's the MAP offsets.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So we
Director.
could provide that. What the most recent one, Madam.
Okay, and so. But what were the conditions for the Tsubaki QC specifically? Are you not allowed to tell the legislature that?
The conditions, the upside limitation of the qualifying certificate amount, that is the primary condition, is that tax benefits cannot exceed 10% of what they put in. There are other conditions associated with compliance, such as this is the type of documentation that you must provide on an annual basis, so that we can ensure that they're in compliance with what they're asking us for and what they're collecting. The benefit that they're collecting is attributed to the entity that is that the entity that's applying for the qualifying certificate. So there's compliance conditions. There's a checklist that they must comply with. But the main condition specific to this qualifying certificate has to do with the amount of the benefit not to exceed 10% of what they invest in the community, or invest in the project.
And then, have any hotel QCs been renewed since 2015?
I don't believe that this qualifying certificate program allows for a renewal feature.
Any new hotels, any hotels been given QCs since 2015?
I believe Tsubaki is the only one, and there was also a qualifying certificate given to JMSH Città di Mare on 2017, and that has since been revoked.
So we only have one right now?
That's correct.
And that's the Tsubaki?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Majority Leader. Senator Torres. Thank you very much. Senator Dueñas.
Sidus Masi, Madam Chair, and listening to some of the previous speakers, I have to make this comment because I used to jog quite a bit with a cousin of mine who's also a public servant. And when I would complain sometimes about shortcomings, he would say, Chris, let me remind you, when it comes to shortcomings in serving our people, the line is long and distinguished. So not having to belabor the point, I'm sure there have been errors and mistakes in the past, but I think it's important to put things back in perspective. Mr. Byrne, as we try to maneuver our way out of this pandemic, I know there's been a lot of talk about economic diversification, but I want to see if I'm on the right track here. Everybody I talk to says the most immediate thing that we can do and have to do in terms of the near term, short term, is to do everything that we can to get tourism back on its feet and to make sure that tourism is something that can rebound and be sustained after this federal money starts to wane going forward. Would that be an accurate statement?
Senator, I'm not really an expert on that subject. That's really a matter for Gita to respond. But obviously, everybody hopes and indeed expects a return for tourists. We're all working to that end. And I'm sure that's why we have hotels, right? Is to invite tourists. But I really think that's a question for Gita to respond to.
I'm going to slide over to Gita. What I wanted to do is you manage the purse. So I just wanted to get the perspective on, you're watching revenues dwindle and wax and wane. And the reason why a lot of us have been asking about the benefits in terms of revenue, in terms of supporting Guam's economy, in terms of everything else, is because I don't think it's hard for us to see the fact that jobs and when we talk about the service industry, when we talk about everything that we lost during COVID, it is fundamentally surrounds tourism. I mean, I'll go to Gita, but wouldn't you say that? Because you've been managing cash resources for quite a bit now.
Yes, sir. Well, clearly, and as you indicate, a lot of our economy is dependent on tourism. Perhaps during the course of the last few months, as Senator commented, we've been able to find ourselves more resilient because we're not looking simply at tourists coming for vacations. We've got other reasons for tourists to be here. But maybe we should replace the word tourist with visitors.
Correct.
But we clearly depend upon having visitors come to the island. And we welcome everybody because that certainly buoys up the revenues.
Mel, I was going to go to you. I just wanted to get it from the guy who watches the bank balances every day. But the follow-on to you, Mel, really is this, and to Gita in general. I mean, literally without having the tools to market. I mean, we all go to you, and I know a lot of us during campaign and everything else, we talk about economic development, diversification. It's always Gita. Gita's responsible to be able to go out there and help Guam, move forward and bring in investment and the like. I mean, how important are these tools to you in terms of being able to do what you need to do?
Well, in the words of Jerry Maguire, help me, help you. If these types of tools are created to make Guam an enticing place to invest, it's part of a total package that makes Guam an enticing place to invest. There are some things we don't have control over that work in our favor and some things that don't. We are 3 hours away from many destinations in Asia. That's different from Hawaii, which is 9 hours away from many destinations in Asia. That's something that's out of our control. A local government's use of tax incentives is a very widespread practice, not only across the United States, but all over the world, as I had referenced earlier. And for us to say that there's organic reasons why, there very well may be, Guam could become the best place for a certain thing, and that'll just bring, okay, and this is a little bit off topic, but in Waco, Texas, no one ever thought that there would be a tourism market in Waco, Texas. And then because of a show on HGTV where there was a star named Joanna Gaines, that all of a sudden, and that had a huge following, that then created its own kind of tourism economy due to no factors under the government's control. And barring a phenomena like that, or something to happen in Guam along those lines that have people pilgrimage here to see the place of such and such an important or significant thing, then we stand alongside other destinations and need to market ourselves. And when we market ourselves, if we come with nothing but our charm, then we're leaving, then we walk away with nothing. And so you put in what you get out. I think that referencing back to what the speaker said earlier about how do we look at the return on investment, and how do we make sure that we do a proper cost-benefit analysis. I think that's a conversation outside of this legislation. When you look at tax credits, and I think Daphne pointed it out, she reports on tax, Director Shimizu pointed it out, she reports on the Guam Registered Apprenticeship Program, which is a tax credit program. There are also a number of tax credit programs out there. There's also our qualifying certificate programs out there. There needs to be a holistic look at all of the tax incentive programs that we're looking at, and to see what is the appetite, so that when you come into forums like this, you can say, this is how much we've authorized, this is how much room we have, and this is where we'd like to go from here. I would highly recommend the body look into doing something like that. Specific to tourism, this is a very good program. Help us help you, and we'll do our best to get those 1,600 room quota filled. We do think time is important to get it done. But we do think that the clock is ticking. There's multiple ways to sunset this bill. You can meet the 1,600 hotel rooms and it goes away. There's an upside limit to the benefit on this. It's only 10% of the, or is it 10% of the invested amount? So there's an upside limit. This has limitations. It's not, again, it's not a blank check that we're writing to big developers. This is very strategic, and very much something that we believe will make us competitive when we go out there and try to promote development to our island.
Thank you. Very well said. So I close with this, Madam Chair, just as a matter of comment. Another wise man, my father, told me, don't give away the farm, son, but you can't lose something you've never owned. And that is, you can't lose money that you don't generate investment opportunity to produce. So sometimes when I hear lost tax revenue, I have to talk about cost-benefit analysis by stating that if you didn't have the investment opportunity to begin with, if you didn't entice the investment, you cannot lose anything because you wouldn't have had that revenue to begin with. Government does not generate revenue, government collects revenue. Sijus Masi, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Dueñas. Senator Moylan, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. There was mention about the 5-year cap on the original law. In the original law, also, there's a 2-year extension. Gita, kindly explain what you did with that 2-year extension process.
With the previous legislation, the 5-year law with the 2-year extension processes were able to be done at the GITA board level. And so what we would do is we would apprise the GITA board of the status of the qualifying certificate program, and from there they would then make the decision at the board level to renew it and extend it.
And we also reach out to stakeholders. That was part of it too.
And did you take advantage of the 2-year extension, and why?
We absolutely did, and the main reason why we did go after the 2-year extension was because at the time the H-2B visa shortage was the primary impediment to development on the island, and I think that's something that was widespread. It was well documented, and we knew that was probably the one factor that if we could sort it out, we could get some development going. And so we presented that to the board along with the sentiments of our stakeholders, including the Guam Visitors Bureau, And from there, they decided to extend.
Excellent, and of course, as we struggle still through the H-2B situation, working outside the fence to support our economy, of course, we can see where this 10-year now is the possibility of even better help for rebuilding our economy. Of course, within the 1,600 rooms will be the cutoff level, so if it doesn't reach 10 years, if we can do it in 3 years, wonderful. If we don't, well, then fine. We have that opportunity to expand that time period. There was some question about the Attorney General's, the Office of, BJ Cruz, talking about the reports on QCs and how we should monitor this. But can you tell us or expand upon us the information between the standard QC versus what this hotel QC and how it is different? There's two different types. There's the standard QC and there's a special program for hotel QCs.
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that question. I do think that at one point in time, it was when the qualifying certificate program came into fruition in the 1960s or 70s, I believe. When the qualifying certificate came into fruition, there was no discussion about how much it would take away from the tax base because, as Senator Dueñas said, you can't collect something you don't have. And so the qualifying certificate program went on for several decades, somewhat unrestricted, and tax benefits were given out exactly as it was so well articulated by the Office of the Public Auditor without some control and measure of what the true return on investment for the people of Guam was. So under the construction of the qualifying certificate, which was done post that report, the qualifying certificate was created with the understanding that it would be the upside of the spend, the ask, would be limited by how much they're looking to invest. And so unlike a situation where it's hard to document and where we'd be sitting before the body and saying, we would like to give them benefits, 100% abatement of this and 100% rebate of that and 100% for the next 20 years, that is much, much harder to quantify than saying it's 10% of what they put in the first 3 years during construction. And at that point in time, you can spread that out over 10 or 20 years, and then we look at what the economy is doing in the next 10 or 20 years to then assess the risk to our tax base. So it was, the Special Hotel QC was created, I believe, in direct response to the commentary that it can't be a blank check that we write to big developers. And I think that's something that the board recognized at the time, used that in the construction of the Special Hotel QC, and uses that with regard to other, any kind of tax incentive that we're kind of pulling out on the table for resurrecting for discussion.
Thank you very much. Next question for Nico. You mentioned the importance of the renovation, which was what was 66 was included. However, due to some questions concerning the fiscal note on that, it was removed, but it was reintroduced as a separate bill. So that's coming down the pipeline. But the importance of that, and with new hotels coming on, if we can get additional folks to come on board through the help of the marketing through Ed here, if this bill passes, so we can continue it for another 10 years. We have competition now with new hotels, right? And you were trying to, I think you were explaining to us the competition of these hotels that had to catch up with these newer hotels on the services provided, the room conditions, the going green nature, the Wi-Fi availability as all you may not find in these older hotels, which we're hoping that they can renovate in addition to keep up with competition. Can you expand upon that, please?
Sure, thank you, Senator. So what we've experienced over the past decade is year-over-year growth in the visitor industry without necessarily increasing capacity. Really, the only two hotels within the past decade was the Dusitani, I believe in 2015, and then the Tsubaki 2020. And so the demand kept growing and the supply wasn't meeting the demand for the market. And so to Ed's point, or to Mr. Camacho's point earlier, if it's not broken, then there was no need to fix it. So a lot of the hotels on Guam, their rooms were filled and didn't necessarily need to reinvest into those rooms. However, now that we've essentially reset the entire industry globally, I think there's no secret that a lot of locals like to spend nights at Dusitani, at the Tsubaki, because it's a new property, and rightfully so. But I think now's the time for the other properties to really look at what they have, what they're offering in terms of amenities or how modernized their rooms are. And I know a lot of the hotels have already been investing into safety measures and sanitization stations and things like that, which is great. But I think across the board, there needs to be a significant capital investment in order for them to elevate to what the new properties are doing, right? So, yeah, I think that's key for us going forward.
Thank you, and hopefully that bill will move forward, but I appreciate it. Mr. Byrne, you also discussed about the tax report earlier. Can you please continue your discussion on that so we can better understand what you have in front of you? Thank you.
Yes, Senator, thank you. I'm sure we weren't alone in getting scathing reports from public auditors. And in response to that, the Government Accounting Standards Board issued GASB 77, which and as you know, our audited financial statements follow all the GASB rules, which requires us to set out in our financial statements information on tax abatements. That's a general term. In our case, it's the tax abatements that arise from the 4 qualifying certificates that Ms. Mendiolo spoke about. And there's actually almost 2 pages of information on the subject. The actual, thank you for helping us to put this in context, it actually tells us that in the year ended, this is September 2020, the amount of the tax rebate that was effectively given to qualifying certificate holders was about 18.8 million, which is something less than 2.5% of our total tax revenues. I've listened to some of the comments from the Speaker and other senators, and I will certainly take note of those for the way we construct the note for the fiscal year that we're currently preparing the statements for, and that might help to clarify some matters, and I'll certainly include more information in it. Since GASB actually 77 doesn't really tell us what information to include, we can make some local adjustments here.
Kindly repeat that. The 18.8 million, and re-emphasize the 2.5% revenue.
Yeah, it's a mixture of different types of taxes. There's property taxes and GRT, but the total amount that was effectively allowed to qualifying certificate holders was 18.8 million, which is something under 2.5% of our total tax collections.
I would say that is a good thing. Are you pleased with those numbers?
Yes, and I think it's a good number. It can, of course, vary from year to year because, as you heard, the terms of the qualifying certificate, the way it affects the tax revenues can change from year to year. But I don't want to go out too much on a limb, but I'm willing to guess that the economic benefit that we received from these certificates, I'm sure, exceeded 18.8 million.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. That says a lot. Thank you to the committee, the panel, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Moylan. Senator Atta.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Brown. Thank you, Senator Perez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps if Director Byrne can just repeat the amounts that were given out in tax breaks.
May I be so bold as to sort of comment on the way you put it? We're not giving out tax breaks. We're conceding tax revenues to qualifying certificate holders. There are 4 programs, and the total amount of tax that was conceded in the year that which this report is, which is September 30th, 2020, was 18,778,845.
Out of the 80, you said out of 82.5 million, is that right?
No, 18 million.
18
And
million.
our total revenues are something over 700 million.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Rogel. Senator San Augustine. Thank you. Senator Titagui.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm just going to read something, so I hope it doesn't bleed into my time, because other than that, we'll pause right now and give everybody a copy of the prior legislation, the bill that was introduced by Senator Rodriguez.
We'll pause for you to pass it out, but for you to read it, it will take your time.
Okay. Well, then, let's pause, or if anybody can, I need a...
We'll take a recess to pass out the document.
It's basic, okay, just...
We are back from recess. Senator Titagui, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mel, can you look on page 6 of the bill that was passed regarding community contributions, section 58205? Can you read that, please?
As a condition of the special hotel QC, the QC beneficiary shall make a community contribution in the amount of 0.5% of the total hotel construction cost. The terms of the community contribution shall be subject to negotiations between the authority and the developer. Distribution of funds to be approved by GITA board based on the recommendation of the administrator will be to the following areas: funding for maintenance and upkeep of certain tourist attractions or support other tourism projects, economic development with the priority on the promotion of industry and small business, higher education and cultural preservation. Shall I go on?
No, that's it.
Okay.
And how much have they already contributed, and where has it gone?
Yes, actually, I'm so happy that you've given us a chance to talk about that. That went into our qualifying certificate community contribution program, which is a grant program that we launched in 2019. And we combined the contributions from the Tsubaki Tower with the GRMC community contribution and have awarded over $1 million to over 60 or so nonprofit organizations as well as agencies, in line with the intent of what was outlined in the law.
And how much did they contribute?
Oh, I would need a minute to pull up those numbers, but if you can give me a moment, we can pull that up.
Tsubaki Hotel, their community contribution was over $800,000, which is half of 1% of the total investment.
And it was done over the course of 3 years worth of payments?
Correct.
3 years worth of payments. I think this fiscal was the last payment that we received to complete that requirement.
So they contributed $800,000 for a rebatement of what, we're looking at 16 million, right? So, and then you mentioned something about the 1% for CAHA. Did they also contribute that on top of the $800,000 that they contributed, Gita?
Yes, that's in addition. The CAHA requirement is in addition to the community contribution requirement.
So they had to meet that. How much was that? Do you know, Ed?
For the Tsubaki Hotel was of the development cost, construction cost, so it was like 800,000, so it was 1% of that, so I think it was about $800,000. It wasn't the full development cost of 165 million.
Okay, so 800,000 to Gita for your program, and then 800,000 to CAHA.
I believe so.
So 1,600 total. Well, this one is 0.05, but the other one is 1%.
Yes, but of different numbers.
Okay. Since you have that in front of you too, can you come to the top of that page 5 and number 1? Can you read that for me, please?
%50 of BPT for 20 years, as long as the tax credits are available at the point they are taken. BPT exemptions shall not apply to the levy of 3 percentage points of the total percentage points levied from time to time of the BPT, the revenues of which are pledged to the government of Guam business privilege tax bonds.
Okay, can you explain that, please? What does this mean?
Yes, the abatement is applicable to 50% of 50%. Okay, so first let's start with how long it's available. It's available for 20 years. It expires in 20 years. They have up to 20 years to utilize. They can apply an exemption of 50% of BPT owed. So if they owe $100,000 in BPT, they can apply $50,000 of that, and that $50,000 can be applied to the unpledged portion of the BPT, so not the 3%. So BPT at the current time is at a rate of 5%, and so to the 2%, not the 3%. 50% of the 50% of the 2%.
Okay.
50% of the remaining unpledged, which is 2%, so that'd be 1%.
Yeah, that's bond covenant. Okay, and then number 2?
75% of the income tax rebate for 20 years.
So what's the difference? One says 75 and the one up there says 50%.
The difference between BPT and income tax, Senator?
What is the cost in that? Well, I mean, yeah, can you explain that?
I'm sorry, Senator, can you clarify? Are you asking me to clarify the difference between BPT and income tax?
No, okay. So it looks like here that they're getting all these different, rebates, right? From 50% on BPT, and then you go to number 2, it says 70% of income tax rebates for 20 years, and then 100% of real property tax, which is further down, and then number 4 as well. So it's looking like they're getting more and more discounts for them. So can you explain the second one?
There are different tax, well, okay, so there is BPT abatement,
right,
income tax rebate, real property tax abatement, or use tax. But remember, we're dealing with one balance here. So if the qualifying certificate allows for 16 million in tax abatements and rebates, then they can apply that 16 million. They can say all 16 million shall be applied to BPT, or we're going to split it between BPT and income. We can put some to real property, et cetera, et cetera. That is up to the qualifying certificate recipient to decide how they'd like to assign the benefit.
Okay, that's very simple and makes it very clear. Thank you so much for that. Lastly, it talked about the H zone, the hotel H zone, and it said that these hotels in these areas, does this also include other hotels being built outside the H zone, more like the R2 zone that can go through a, compliance? Does this qualify for them too if it's outside the H zone? Because this can be done through conditional use, by the way. That's the word I was looking for, conditional use in the commercial zones.
Yes, thank you, Senator. No, this doesn't, the H zones don't apply to the special hotel QC. The reason why I brought up H zones earlier was just to show that it's as a matter of capacity, adding additional rooms beyond even 1,600, we do need to take into consideration the environmental impact and how much zones are actually designated for that particular use.
Let me add to that, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
A hotel can be built on a different zone other than H, but there's requirements in height and density. So basically, the H zone has different requirements. The bar is higher where they can build higher densities and capacities versus a different zone. But a hotel can be built if they get the proper clearances and zoning for a hotel. But it would go up to like 6 stories only or 60 feet. There are different requirements.
So in other words, these hotels don't have to be on an H zone as long as it meets the compliance or given a conditional use in that area.
And we don't have any of them that are on other than H zone properties.
Right, and that brings me to my last comment with regards to that. I know we're trying to build up our economy. We're trying to do it, staying in economic growth that's more into a green perspective and also sustainable, in our economic growth. But, we also don't want to turn into a Las Vegas, or we don't want to turn into something that like Waikiki where it's all cemented. People come to Guam because it's an island, and I think it's important that we maintain that perspective, that who we are, not only our culture, but, how this is an island. This is not a miniature, Waikiki or, like I said, Las Vegas. So I hope, as Gita, issues out these QCs that, you take into perspective, and just bringing it up with GVB and then yourself, Ed, not wanting that type of look for our island. I'm glad to hear that you're actually saying that and mentioning it. I think it should have been mentioned more during this whole morning, besides just this one time to think about that, in our growth. So I thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you all today and for you being here. Merry Christmas to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Taitagui. That completes round 2. For questions of the panel, we'll now take a brief recess to dismiss the panel. Saduas Masi, everyone. Merry Christmas. Be safe. Thank you very much. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. We are on Bill number 66-36 COR as amended and further substituted on the floor. There are no amendments in the drive at this time. Senator Perez.
I would like to put an amendment, but based on the discussion, is it possible to come back for, take a quick recess or a recess for lunch?
Okay, we will recess for lunch at this time. Please prepare all amendments and send them to the clerks. And we will finish up the third round with amendments right after lunch. We are in recess until 2 p.m.